Today I'm speaking with Dr. Kelly Casperson. She's a board certified urologist, women's health advocate, sex education expert, public speaker, and host of her own podcast, You Are Not Broken. And her mission is to empower women to live their best love lives by working to combine power of body, mind, relationships, and break down really difficult topics that don't need to be difficult. And what I love about her is on her podcast, but also her newly released book, You're Not Broken, she dives into these topics and helps women regain their empowerment to live their best love lives. So Kelly, thanks for talking with me today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. So for people who don't know, we met at a women empowerment conference and I was hooked like that. And I think pretty much everybody is, but I want to hear in your own words, what you're doing so well and what you're passionate about with women's urology and women's sex lives, because not enough people are doing this and they need to hear from you what magic you're bringing to the table.
Totally. Well, thanks for having me. It's crazy to me that it's 2022 and I feel like I'm the start of a revolution, or like I get to be part of a revolution. Like women are so hungry for accurate, science-based, researched education on this. Like we're all curious about our bodies and we're just kept in the dark and fed misinformation all the time. So like when a feisty doc comes up who like tells it like it is and is like, you guys, like legitimately, we just need to know this stuff. They're like all in.
Well, I think what's cool too is your personality is backed by what you stand for, right? Like women's empowerment, women's ability to take a stand for their rights again and talk about their own bodies and not feel like there's something wrong with them. So tell me kind of how you took that on your own journey and developed your podcast and your writing that just came out. I mean, it's a big deal.
It's a big deal. So I started learning. I had this deep dive like 3 years ago. I had a patient specifically who like put me into the curiosity of like, does anybody know? Who knows? Why don't people know? And so like I went and did my education, and then there was this like voice in my head, and it was like, you're not helping enough people by just being a doctor in clinic, air quotes, just being a doctor. But like, it like tells you like, you know, like doctors are like, they're curious and they want information and they tend to be at the top of their class. And so it's just like, you get this information and you're like, now what? And this voice was like, talk, you need to talk, you need to talk. And by that point, I was pretty comfortable on social media and I listened to a lot of podcasts. And so I was like, well, how hard can it be? Let's just try it. Right. And for the first 6 months, I think I got like 2,500 listens, the full first 6 months, but it's like all organic growth. It's been incredible. I'm like number 3 in Britain today, usually in the top 10 to 20 in America under sexuality and podcasts. And it's like, nobody's doing it in the way that I'm doing it, which is really like friendly, approachable, but kind of like blunt and in your face. And like, I'm not going to sit back and be like, well, you know, do what you want to do, because how can you do what you want to do when you don't know anything, right? Like we are coming from having no education. So I really want people to be like, get the knowledge, go see your doctor, talk to your partner, like go live the best life that you can.
Yeah. Well, you're being humble. I mean, your podcast is crazy successful. I've listened to it. I'm obsessed with it. I love it. Honestly, like you are super successful on there. So for people listening, I want you to check it out. I'm going to have the link so you can go straight to it from the site. But more than that, Kelly, you talk about being the best friend that a woman's never had until now. And I love that you say that, because the way that you phrase things is you take taboo topics, you take stuff that everyone's afraid to talk about. And you're like, no, screw it. We're going to talk about it and we're going to fix it. So I love that you're empowering the scary stuff that people don't want to talk about, or they were kind of scared to talk about, right? Well, and you're now spinning in a way of like embracing it and then owning ourselves. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Totally. Well, I think it's just like knowing that like when you shine the sunshine on it, like shame tends to dissipate. And there's just like this layer of shame. And it's like, once I'm like, hey, you know, like I'm in a heterosexual long-term relationship with kids with a full-time job too, you know, like I went through this, I learned, I got to see, you know, how I can live my best love life. And so it's not just like this academic person. It's like, I'm just like a legitimate human, just like everybody else. We all have these same needs, and women really want to talk about it. Right. And like, once you get them started, they're like, hey, I took like at the conference we were at, you know, somebody came to the next day and they're like, hey, listen to your talk, took your advice. My husband happens to be here, had the best sex that I'd had in like 20 years last night. Thank you.
Wow. There's that.
That's why you show up, you know, it's like change people's lives.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool too, because you're not just talking about sex education or health education or women's topics. I mean, you are bringing men into the mix and you're making this a topic and an arena for everybody. I mean, obviously women's health is at the forefront, but you're educating everybody to make this a matter for everyone to be included on, right? So that we can help and not just isolate certain groups. So what is your overall goal? I mean, I'm obsessed with what you're doing with your podcast. I've already learned from you. I've loved the education that you're giving to everybody and breaking it down in an easy way. But with your book too, what are you hoping to really bring forward in the future?
It's a great question. I want to normalize the conversation. Ideally, I want to get doctors educated because it's just part of life, right? Like sexuality is part of life and doctors are part of helping people live best lives. So it's like normalizing it. The big audacious goal is to like be the sex ed, the adult sex ed, not this like disease and pregnancy prevention program, which I would say is kind of mediocre at best right now in our country. But like to be the adult sex ed of like, this stuff can be fun. It can be interesting. It can make you grow personally. And as a couple in a relationship, like be the sex ed that the adults need.
I guess what I would like to hear from you is what is one mistake that you often see women making that you have an easy answer for? Because I know you've got a ton of them, but what is like the number one thing that you're like, ooh, I can change that for you in just a second?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is this concept. So many women are stuck because they're like, I don't have desire, so I don't have a sex life. And like, I love challenging it because desire is a thought, right? Thoughts are created in our brain and thoughts can be created purposefully. And so I'm like, number one, you can create desire. You just haven't been taught how. And number two, you don't even need desire to go have a great sex life. And I love telling people that because it's like, do you think all the fit people in the world like desire exercise all the time? They don't. Or all the people who like eat enough vegetables desire to eat enough vegetables all the time? They don't. But they just incorporate this into their life because they say, hey, as a human who's in a relationship, that's important to me. So to me, I'm like, I have a chapter in my book, like I talk about desire, spontaneous, responsive, because there's two different types of the desire. I talk about how desire can be created in our brain. And then I finally have a chapter at the end, which is like F word desire. Like you don't even need it. Like get rid of getting stuck. So many people are like, they think that's the on-ramp when it's like, no, that's not even the on-ramp. You don't even need it. Go have some fun.
Awesome. Well, I love your enthusiasm, your excitement for the topic. Like we need this. We need a woman to stand up and talk about this stuff. So thank you for doing that. Anybody listening, check out her book. I'm going to have links for the website, the podcast, her book. But honestly, Dr. Casperson, thank you for everything that you're doing, changing women's lives. Genuinely, when I say that though, people listening, she changed mine. Like I have education now to help my patients, but also for myself. So thank you for taking time to explain it to us on a personal and a best friend level. You're awesome.
Thanks for having me.